So having the wrong diagnosis was not only detrimental for not being able to avoid these long-term consequences, but I was actually doing harm by treating a disease that wasn't the right disease. I was causing my body further harm by not treating the right disease. Fresh out of the shower, poofy, gonna be weird hair. Just gonna let it do its thing. Hello, this is Jen. Welcome to Momming with Migraine, or Momming with Migraine and or whatever the heck else is going on in my brain and other systems of my body. Got an itch. I'm going to start with a quick timeline of my life. I have always been a little bit tachycardic. I've always had a couple of weird symptoms about me, but it's never been anything alarming or worth looking into. My first signs of orthostatic intolerance were at the end of middle school. I started having episodic migraines in high school, and I've had a chronic daily headache for, I honestly don't know how many years. When I met my husband, I was 19, and at that point I told him that I could not recall a day where I did not have a headache. I'm 30 now, and that still hasn't changed. When I was 25, I got diagnosed with chronic migraine. Over the 5 years since then, I have been getting more and more weird neurological symptoms, and they all just keep getting lumped into migraine. Every time I go to a neurologist, migraine. If I go to cardiology, it's probably migraine. You should talk to your neurologist. And for a while, I actually believed that. I wanted this channel to be a supportive place for other people who had chronic and complex migraine like mine, so that we could all band together and not feel so scared of the weird symptoms that we were having. After a little bit of having the YouTube channel, someone approached me and said, "You might have something underlying." And that kind of matched with the things that I had been starting to uncover. A few months before I started my channel, I came down with POTS. And then a few months after I started my channel, I found out that POTS is sometimes seen as more of a symptom than a disease, which means that with POTS, there's often something underlying, maybe even always. And you know how they talk about a mama bear protecting their cub? Well, at that point, I was pregnant, and that realization turned me into not mama bear, but mama bull, as in, I need to go. I need to figure out what is underlying here. Because once that little tiny dot connected in my head, all of the other pieces started to fall. All of this stuff started to land differently in my head. I started to notice how much I kept getting sent to psychology every time I said there might be something other than migraine. I started to notice that they just were pushing pills and they didn't really seem to actually listen to my symptoms. I couldn't get a doctor to try to connect dots that were across disciplines. Stuff like that. But the thing is, your body works together. And I was like, man, if not for me, for my kids, I need to figure out what's underlying here, because if I'm not treating this right, I could be doing some harm. Migraine itself is seen as quite benign, but other diseases that mimic migraine are not so benign. Which brings me to my new diagnosis, which is not so benign. I hate to do this to you, but I gotta drag it out just a tiny bit more to tell you that this is not the whole story. If we are to compare this whole thing, a metaphor to a house, for example, this may be the foundation of the house, or it may be the framework of the house. It's certainly a really important part of my diagnosis, and we could not have figured out the whole picture or the whole house without this piece. However, this piece alone is not everything, and I'll share a little bit more here, but a lot of this stuff is still preliminary. I'm still going through testing. We have to be pretty conservative in our efforts right now because I am pregnant. So just know that I don't actually have all of the answers yet, but this is a really huge piece of the puzzle. Guys, I have pseudotumor cerebri, IIH, idiopathic intracranial hypertension. My cranial pressure is too high. And not only could that have been really awful if we had left it untreated, but some of the things that I was doing to mitigate my migraine or mitigate my POTS were actually potentially worsening the maybe underlying cause of this high pressure in my brain. So having the wrong diagnosis was not only detrimental for not being able to avoid these long-term consequences, but I was actually doing harm by treating a disease that wasn't the right disease. I was causing my body further harm by not treating the right disease. Those of you who have never been through a battle with chronic illness might be wondering right now, how in the heck does this happen? How does a person who is actively seeking neurological care go undiagnosed for something like high brain pressure when all of the neurological signs are pointing to high brain pressure? You're going to have to talk to my neurologist on that one. Well, family history of migraine and personal history of episodic migraine means boom, lumped into migraine. Family history of anxiety and personal history of some spotty anxiety. I'm not the most anxious person, but a lot of stuff gets lumped in, especially if you have tachycardia. So, anxiety. I did have evidence of swelling of the optic nerve behind my eyeball. I don't know why that was ignored. Well, I do know why it was ignored. It was ignored because my subsequent MRI was normal, but when I Googled it, MRIs can totally be normal if you have high cranial pressure. I was never offered follow-up testing, something like a lumbar puncture, thank goodness, because I don't think that I would want to do that anyway. For a lot of people, the risk is worth the benefit for getting a lumbar puncture, but I would worry that with my hypermobility and my slow healing, it probably would be a bad idea to punch any holes in my dura. They're freaking helicopters. Go away! I guess I'll be back later when the helicopters are done. Okay, we're back. Here we go. I remember that I was just talking about how it all got dismissed and categorized under what I already had, but I don't remember where I was going with it. Okay. Gosh. I don't know how to word this. The other piece to the puzzle is how much I believed, how much I advocated for myself or didn't advocate for myself. And those are things that fluctuate over time. There were days that I was a lot more bold in sharing the experiences that I was having during my migraines, but a lot of times with friends, with coworkers, even with family, I tried to sort of minimize it because I thought that I sounded absolutely crazy talking about it. For example, a few months into my migraine diagnosis is when I started getting my seizures. They were partial seizures. When they were happening like 14 times a day, it was inevitable that a couple of people at my work had to find out. So I had a couple of people on like my safety team, but for the most part, I didn't really let people see me that way. When you're getting seizures and you don't have a diagnosis of epilepsy, people are like, we need to get you to the hospital now. And I kept telling them, like, I'm under the care of some of the top neurologists in the world. They're not concerned about these seizures. I don't see why I should be. They're telling me that this is just migraine. Why should I think that they're wrong? Who am I to think that they would be brushing me off? That would be so hypochondriac of me. That would be so anxiety of me. And it was this constant state of, should I go to the hospital? Should I not go to the hospital? Because every time a new symptom came up, it was one of those symptoms where the nurses that you can call, the advice nurses that tell you whether or not you should go to the ER or urgent care, every single symptom that I get is one where they automatically say that you need to go in. Like chest pain. I'm tachycardic, I get chest pain. I'm like, I'm having labored breathing with my chest pain. They're like, well, any chest pain, you need to be in the ER. Well, I can't afford that. They say if I have a seizure, I need to go to the ER. I'm like, I can't live in the ER. That summer, I actually had an episode of heat stroke that was induced by a medication that I was put on for my migraines, Topiramate, Topamax. It limits your ability to sweat. That would have been a nice thing to get warned about when it was a hot California summer. So I completely passed out from heat stroke. My husband brought me back and we didn't even take me to the hospital for that. Because at that point it was like, well, Jennifer did a vegetable thing and then came back. Jennifer's always doing vegetable things and then coming back. Nobody was taking any of it seriously. I felt so alone. I felt so isolated. And I felt really embarrassed. Super embarrassed. And then I'd tell people that I've been diagnosed with complex migraine or complicated migraine and, oh, migraine, bad headaches, man, I get bad headaches too. No, that's not what I'm going through. What I'm going through is something else. But even the neurologists were saying that what I'm going through isn't something else, so then even I sometimes believed it. And then for a while I believed it. And without this YouTube, I don't think I would have found my diagnosis. Because without some of you pushing me to find something underlying, I don't know if I would have had it in me. I don't know if I would have started trusting myself over trusting these doctors. That's a really big leap to make. It's a really big leap to just start firing like 12 doctors in a row. Especially because when I'm doing that, I'm saying, no, you're not giving me the answer that I'm looking for, so I'm going to go elsewhere and find someone who will give me the answer I'm looking for. And I think that's actually what I sometimes even convinced myself of. But that wasn't even what was happening. I was just saying, can we look into this further? Like, maybe just a little bit. So when I created this YouTube and I was convinced that I had complex migraine, I really just wanted to be a support system for other people who had complex migraine and needed someone to believe them. Someone to believe that they were having crazy symptoms and not necessarily to think that there was something underlying, but at least that there's someone out there who understands what you're going through and doesn't think that you're insane because you pass out with all of your migraines, or because you tremor, or because you seize, or you go paralyzed, or you go blind, or any of the other crazy things that have been happening to me. I wanted you guys to have someone here to say, look, it's fine, I'm alive. Migraine is terrifying, but you can make it. Now, I'm like, you guys might have saved my life. You guys might have saved my children's chance of having a mom who's normal, because without you guys pushing me and telling me that I'm not crazy for thinking that there's something underlying, I don't know if I would have pushed as hard as I did. The helicopters really threw me off. I'm going to pull out my computer and we can look into what would have happened, potentially, if this had continued to go left untreated. This is stuff that I prefer not to think about, and I'm really hoping that we can get a hold of my pressure so that I don't have to deal with these things in the future. Here we go. Untreated IIH. What happens if IIH is left untreated? Can result in permanent problems such as vision loss. The pressure can cause symptoms similar to those of a brain tumor, including worsening headache and vision problems. Untreated can result in permanent problems, vision loss. The prognosis is quite variable and difficult to predict in each person. In some people, it goes away on its own within months. In some people, it returns, manifests as severe headaches and visual impairments. How serious is IIH? Chronic intracranial hypertension can be life-threatening if it remains undiagnosed and the causes are not treated. Women with IIH are twice as likely to be at risk of cardiovascular disease, including heart failure and stroke. And even though it isn't a real tumor, it can still cause serious health problems. Seeing a healthcare provider right away to promptly diagnose symptoms and begin treatment can help to prevent complications. A lot of stuff about dizziness, nausea and or vomiting, pain, unusual sensations. It's typically in obese women of childbearing age. Although I'm not obese, I'm definitely of childbearing age. And there are things that you can do to help make it better, and there are things that you can do that make it worse, like eating a lot of salt, which is the first thing that they tell POTS patients to do. So I was down a potentially quite ugly path. Ooh, let me look up how often blindness happens, because I feel like that was kind of a lot. This is just the thing that popped up, the top one on Google from NCBI. About 1/10 of patients with IIH can have permanent visual loss that can occur early or late in the course of the disease. And if I had continued to eat salt and make it worse, does that increase my odds even more? I don't find myself speechless very much, but I'm a little bit speechless. Like I said before, there's not a ton that we can do right now because I am pregnant. I do also still get symptoms of low pressure headaches sometimes. I do still have that nasal drip with exertion, and it is high glucose. So there is still possibility of something like a leak, but I am definitely running high pressure, and we were not going to get anywhere with anything else without treating that high pressure first. I'm making some absolutely huge steps in my recovery now that we know what's actually going on, and I'm avoiding the things that are actually aggravating it. Recovery so far has been very up and down. It's a roller coaster, but the trajectory is overall positive. I am having higher high days I'm also having some lower low days, but on average, things seem to be improving, or at least they're excessively improved from like a month or two ago, and I'm hoping that they're still continuing to improve. Recovery is not linear. No matter what you're going through, recovery is not linear. But I'm having some crazy things happen to me, like that I can get up from bed in the middle of the night and go use the restroom because I'm pregnant and come back to bed without needing to sit and let my heart rate settle down, without getting a ton of vertigo. Sometimes in the morning I wake up not completely congested. I'm much more conversational for longer times. I'm upright a lot more. I can cook again. I've been cooking up a storm. In the mornings when I'm usually pretty vegetative, I can now walk and talk at the same time. I know that doesn't sound like normal, but it's a really big deal that I've been doing that sometimes. I can prep the coffee machine while I'm having a conversation. This is all really big stuff. I don't know if I've mentioned it, but I'm reading. I'm watching movies. Even in the times before my chronic migraine diagnosis, I didn't really like movies very much. Now I understand why. So now I've been catching up on a bunch of movies. Let's see. I'm telling stories in groups. I'm telling stories that my husband said he hasn't heard before, or that he hasn't heard in a really long time. And I even told a story in a big group yesterday without passing the baton to my husband. Usually what we do is I'll start a story, and then once I lose my train of thought, I pass the baton to my husband, like, okay, Brian, you go. And that's my way of not letting everybody know that I'm a freaking vegetable inside. So that's been really nice. And I'm also remembering plot points from my own life and from my friends' lives. Like, I'm recalling information from previous conversation that I can bring up in this conversation in order to help the conversation flow. Like, I'm contributing. You may have noticed I'm also really blabby in YouTube videos. In my YouTube videos, I'm suddenly just blah, 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 blah. I'm not even writing anything down, I'm just talking. And yeah, I lose my train of thought still, but it is night and day. All this to hammer in the fact that diagnosis is king. You need to know what's wrong with you if you want to make progress. And if your diagnosis isn't quite clicking, like migraine wasn't quite clicking for me, and there's just something in your gut, something in your heart that tells you that you need to keep moving on and keep going to find a new doctor, then you need to follow that. If I had continued to decline the way that I was because I was treating my body properly for migraine, then my husband would continue to have a vegetable wife, my children would grow up with potentially a blind mom, and none of that is bad, but if it's avoidable, let's freaking avoid it. And just because I'm on here and someone's got to say it, for those of you who are leaving the mean comments saying that I'm a hypochondriac, that I just need to go do some yoga, that I just have really high anxiety, or I'm hypervigilant, or that I need to stop Googling my symptoms because my doctor said I'm fine, so just listen to my doctor. Who do you think you are? Because you're just the patient, blah, blah, blah. I'm not even going to say anything mean to you. I'm just going to say I told you so, and stop being a bully on the internet, and that's it. Thank God I had the common sense to not listen to you. And lastly, guys, your support circle doesn't have to be big to get you through these super dark times. I had 2 people in my life, maybe 3, and they kept me sane through all this. You need people who you can confide in, people who you can trust. And that takes a lot of confiding in people to see if you can get trust. But once you find those rocks, you've got them. Hold on to them, be honest about your feelings. And I always say, don't be shy about giving yourself time and grace to get over appointments that don't go so well. But if you feel like you do need to get up and keep fighting, please do find that energy within yourself when you're ready and go keep fighting. Because you don't want to be doing something like my high salt diet thing that I was prescribed by the cardiologist. That, yeah, it was band-aiding a symptom, it was band-aiding the low blood pressure, but it could have been exacerbating my underlying cause. And that was just going to doom me in the long run. You deserve to have answers, and you deserve to be listened to. And I wasn't listened to until I literally found a doctor who literally went through this fight herself. I regret that I didn't want it bad enough for myself, but I'm so thankful that I wanted it bad enough for my children. And I guess that's it. Oh, one more thing I want to tell you guys. I've been pulling vocabulary words out of my brain that I don't think I've ever heard before, but I use them in sentences properly, so I have. But guys, they're just popping in. They're just popping into sentences like I've said them before. That's been wild. Alright, anyway, I should have said that way back during the list, but I had to squeeze it in. Thank you for listening. I will see you guys soon. Hit like, subscribe, you know, all the things. Just do the things. I'm hungry. I'm gonna go.